Everybody, thanks for tuning into this episode. So, I'm going to show you guys how I shore dive for lobster and certain things that you need whenever lobstering. So, first off, you need your fins, your mask, and your snorkel. Once you got your swim gear, alright, you need a very important safety feature, which is a dive flag. So, you can buy these at pretty much any store, at least down in the Keys. And the way it works, just get your flag up like this. That means you're in the water diving. And it has this big buoy and a weight. So it's going to sit like this in the water and float around and show everybody that you are swimming in the area. That way boats aren't going to get close, because by law they got to be within 300 feet, or they can't be within 300 feet of you on plane. So it gives you some space, some buffer room. So that's what you need. And it also works good because you attach your bag to it, and that way the lobster won't take off or swim away. You won't lose that bag. And then you attach this to your person by a line or a rope, anything like that, and swim freely with the flag behind you. That way you don't get too far. Next thing you need is a net. There's a few different variations, few different shapes and sizes, but this one is the most generic. Pretty much find it anywhere, and I mean, it's just simple, big enough for the lobster to get in, and tough enough that most of them won't rip through it. Once they get old, you probably need to replace it, but this should last you a while. So that's one good one to have. Next thing, yes, it's pink, yes, it doesn't matter. You'll see them usually in pink or in yellow. This is called a tickle stick. And what you do with this, it's a very hard piece of something. I think fiberglass maybe. But anyway, you get that, and then you get your measuring device. This is your measuring gauge. Alright, this is, again, another generic one that come in variety of colors. This is the part you're measuring on. It is the measuring gauge that is 3 inches long. So you take this and you hook it between the horns on the lobster, not the eyes, but the horns, and then you measure this part, and it should go where the carapace is on the lobster, and it should not go over, because then it's too small. And if it lands on top of the carapace, the one piece, then you're good. You got yourself to keep your lobster. Additional thing to have, no fog. It is a mask concentrate. So you spray this in your mask, and it allows your mask to stay clearer for longer. So you're not having to come up, spit in your goggles, wipe them out, and then re-wash them. This is really handy. So I always try to keep this floating with me, and you'll see it in the bag with the lobster. I mean, it floats. It's not going anywhere. So it's a good tool to have. Mesh bag. So this is extremely generic. Alright, this will hold 6 lobster, a few more even. I wouldn't stress it. I wouldn't, just carry this whole thing, because it'd probably rip. But, you can... I think that was almost a car accident. Anyway, so you can fit easily your 6 personal lobster in here, and then you just shut it, and then black part down, there you go. Now they're all locked in. They do sell more common ones, more, I guess, experienced, a little bit heavier duty. You don't really have issues with the bags ripping as much. They're easier to get the lobster out. I just haven't bought one yet. And then, most importantly, are good gloves. I have the hammerhead gloves. A little worn out, but I use these for spearfishing as well as lobstering. Very thick coating. They go on pretty easily, and then they're tough. You're not really going to get pricked, because they are known as spiny lobsters, so therefore covered in spines, and they will mess up your hands. So definitely a good pair of gloves if you're doing it not very often. You just need a basic generic pair. But if you're doing it more often and you're spearfishing, invest. I mean, these were like 20, 25 bucks, and well, I use them a ton, so they're really good. But hope that gives you guys a good little idea of what you need to lobster from shore. You don't need a ton of stuff, but you do need some things. Some are required, and then some just make your life a lot easier. So watch the video. Hope you guys enjoy it. Hope I'm able to give you some tips, and go get your own lobster. The hardest part about shore diving is most of the time you're not really in deep water, so you're not always going to find where the lobster are. So sometimes it takes trial and error, going to a few different areas, seeing like, hey, there's small ones here, that means there's going to be bigger ones at some point, or just trying to find them in general. And then when you do find them, sometimes they're in difficult little crevices, and you got to get different angles to try to catch them. And kind of got to go back and forth on each side of the rock until you can actually get them out, because they're not always just simple and tickling them out. Sometimes they take a little more work. As you get more experienced with looking at the lobster underwater, you'll soon learn what the small ones look like, which are these two off to the left, and where the bigger one that's a keeper is. And in this case, it's this guy right here under the rock that I'm trying to get out. I always like to inspect the rock really before I go for the lobster itself, because they're not going anywhere. So I always find if there's a hole in the back, I try to cover it. That way, if the lobster's first instinct is to shoot backwards, well, now I've got a net already behind that hole, so he just shoots right in the net. Other times, you're trying to push him back, and they decide to walk a little bit more forward. So you work with it, you adjust, and then when you know he's out of the hole, you bring the net around and work on getting him there. Once they're in the net, then you do the underwater measuring, which is why it's nice to have the measuring device, the gauge, either on the net or on your tickle stick. And you just pull it out real quick, measure the carapace, and if he's good, there you go, you got dinner. This particular set of rocks have a lot of crevices to them, so kind of found myself going back and forth trying to locate his antennas and see where he was going, because he just kept moving out of sight from one angle, and then I'd have to go and find another angle, and then it took a lot of work. In this case, persistence paid off. It's really nice that lobster don't bleed and attract sharks, because I'm sure if I left this bag floating there and then went away to get another lobster and came back, these lobster were bleeding and sharks were like attracted to it, then I'd come back to an empty, ripped up bag. Oftentimes, the lobster will be close to crabs and eels, and that's one thing you got to watch out for when you're digging your hand around in these rocks, because you might get that spider crab like that one up there. And not that I've been pinched by one, but I'd rather not find out if it hurts or not. But stone crab, those are one that will definitely hurt if you get pinched. And eels, I have not been bit, but I've been close to seeing them, and I'd rather not find out if they bite or how that feels. Sometimes when I'm pretty sure one's a small one, I know there's a bigger one nearby, I try to get the small one out of the way. But it's always good to double check just in case that small one is actually a keeper, because you don't want to be throwing away a keeper if you can help it. So as I just pointed out there is a molted lobster shell, which means a lobster recently grew. Now lobster and crab both will molt their old shell as they get bigger, and so when you see a molted lobster shell, like it means that there's a lobster that just got bigger. Hopefully, of course, he just got legal size. But what it tells you is that there are lobster in the area, and it's definitely a good place to at least come back to if you're starting to see, small lobsters, because eventually they have to be big enough. Where I'm at here, there's a lot of this grass out in this area, so when the lobster take off, I've lost a few just that disappear out there. This one, though, I was able to locate, and he was right next to my bag, so that made it real easy. So when crabs molt, they become soft-shell crabs, and that's what you'll find in restaurants sometimes. But in this case, this was a soft-shell lobster because this was the one that had just molted, and that was what I was showing you earlier. They do make better mesh bags than this basic one that I have, but I just haven't gotten one yet. For anyone wondering, I do wear a wetsuit pretty much whenever I spearfish, because a lot of times I'm doing the shallow water stuff and you're rubbing up against who knows what, all this moss, stinging life. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff down there. So I always wear a wetsuit just because, I don't know, kind of makes my life a little bit easier. And, well, I don't end up with a weird rash or getting stung or, anything like that. Because, I mean, just look at it. It's all covered in sea life of sorts, and it's pretty gross. I went back to find the molted shell to see if it was in fact smaller before I found the bigger legal size one that had molted. So if you see here, I'm going to show you the measurements of it. You take the measuring gauge and you put it between the horns, the hard part, not the eyes, and you put it all the way back to the end here. That was just an example because it was too small, but when you get a bigger one, it won't drop over that edge and touch the tail, like the example I just showed you would have if the lobster was still that small. This is the last lobster that I need to get my 6-man limit. And as you can see, there's other lobster there, but the one in front of him is definitely too small. The one to his right is probably pretty close, but I know this guy is the biggest, and I'm pretty sure he's a keeper, so I'm going to do my best to get him out. Definitely a keeper. So he's going into the bag, and that's going to complete my shore dive for the day. Thank you guys for watching. I hope I was able to give you some tips and tricks. If you're just starting out, just keep looking. I mean, right now in the wintertime, they're a little bit harder to find close to shore, but I'm sure there's still some there, and you just got to look around and get in there and not be afraid to get dirty or get up in some gross places, because that's just where they're going to be. But, I mean, hey, if you want your lobster, you got to work for them. Just be safe out there. Don't dive too hard if you're not that experienced, and just take your time. The lobster aren't going to take off like a fish will. They're going to pretty much sit in the same place, unless they've been harassed a lot. That's a little different story. But thanks, guys, for watching. Hope you enjoyed.